My name is Willa Hart, and I am 35 years old. Friday at 11:23 a.m., 37 minutes before the scheduled scholarship committee vote. I was sitting at table 14 near the service doors during the Bangor Mercy Hospital Foundation Board meeting and donor luncheon. Coffee was burning on a warmer near the back wall. Donor badges clicked softly against metal lanyard clips, and the folded agenda in my hand had a rough paper edge that kept catching beneath my thumb. At 11:23 that morning, my Aunt Maureen Hart took the foundation microphone in the hospital where I worked nights and told 125 people I had never really been a Hart. Then she called me Charity, as if the word could peel my name off every chart, every night shift, every family record Grandpa Ellis had protected. She did not look at me directly when she said it. Maureen rarely did when the knife was meant to be admired by the room. Her pearl studs were bright under the conference lights. Her polished fingernail tapped once against the side of the microphone, the same way it used to tap glass when she wanted silence at family dinners. Roland stood 3 feet behind her, with his folded linen handkerchief in one hand, clearing his throat before he agreed with nothing and protected no one. I did not stand right away. I did not cry. I sat with the agenda under my thumb and counted the seconds, because in emergency medicine, counting is how you keep the room from becoming louder than the truth. She thought adoption was paper. Grandpa Ellis had saved the bracelet. Welcome to By Then I Knew, where we tell calm stories about quiet women, family betrayal, and the kind of justice that does not need to shout. If you like stories where the truth arrives slowly and stays, subscribe and settle in. Drop your city and what time it is below. I love knowing where you're listening from. Now let me take you back to the first time Maureen Hart made sure I understood where she thought I belonged. I was 8 years old at the Hart family reunion outside Bangor in late August of 1999. Standing in a lakeside church hall, where the floorboards gave a little under the weight of 42 relatives, 7 folding tables, and 1 window fan that clicked every 4 seconds like it was counting for me before I knew how to do it myself. The hall smelled of baked beans, lake mud, and lemon furniture polish. Every table had a vinyl cloth with red checks printed too bright, and the one under my wrist stuck to my skin because someone had spilled lemonade there before we arrived. My paper plate bent in the middle under potato salad because the bottom had gone soft, and I remember holding it with both hands, careful not to let the beans slide into the roll. Maureen was 35 then, the age I am now. She wore white cropped pants, pearl studs, and the same small smile she used when she wanted other adults to think she was doing something generous. She was arranging everyone for the annual Hart family photo, moving cousins by height, putting older relatives in chairs, sliding the babies onto laps, placing spouses beside spouses and siblings beside siblings. I stood near Grandpa Ellis because I knew the smell of him, cedar shavings and black coffee, and because he always had cough drops in the left pocket of his jacket even when he said they were for himself. The photographer lifted his camera. The old flash made a small whining sound. Maureen looked across the group and saw me between Paige and Grandpa Ellis, close to the middle. She crossed the floor in 9 steps. I counted them later in my head. Not then. Then, I only knew the sound of her sandals against the wood and the way the fan clicked twice before she reached me. She touched my shoulder with 2 fingers, not enough pressure to hurt, and not enough warmth to comfort. Then she smiled at the photographer and said, "Willa, sweetheart, stand on the end, blood family in the middle." There are sentences children understand first by direction, not by meaning. She did not say I was unwanted. She did not say I was temporary. She moved me 6 feet to the edge of the photo and made the edge look polite. No one objected. That was the lesson. A room could be full of people who knew a thing was wrong, and still the only sound would be a window fan clicking every 4 seconds while a child learned where to put her hands. My plate was still bending. My wrist still smelled like lemonade and plastic tablecloth. I remember the camera flash warming my face from too far away. And I remember looking down because my dress shoes were scuffed at both toes from walking near the lake before dinner. Then Grandpa Ellis stepped out of the center. He did not argue with Maureen in front of the children. He did not make a speech. He simply left the chair where she had placed him, crossed to the end of the line, and put his hand on my shoulder. His palm was wide and dry. It settled there with the weight of a door closing against bad weather. The photographer hesitated. Maureen's smile tightened by a fraction. Roland cleared his throat near the punch bowl, then said nothing. The flash went off. In the photo, there are 40 people smiling toward the camera, one little girl at the edge holding a sagging plate, and one old man beside her who had chosen the edge on purpose. I did not know yet that this would become the family map. Maureen would arrange the center. Roland would preserve his comfort. Grandpa Ellis would stand where the truth needed company. I learned that afternoon that placement was a language. I learned that some people could insult you by making room for you in the wrong place. 8 years later, at 16, I stood in the Bangor High School gymnasium beside a trifold poster board covered with 18 hand-drawn route maps and 312 recorded response time entries. The gym smelled like floor wax and popcorn from the basketball concession stand. My palms were gritty with dried glue because 9 minutes before judging, the lower corner of my worst response time graph had peeled up, and I had pressed it back into place with both hands. My project was about rural ambulance response times during snowstorms. I had spent 4 months calling dispatch offices, checking road distances, and comparing storm records to arrival times. I knew which towns lost the most minutes when Route 15 iced over. I knew which bridges created delays. I knew that a 1-2 minute difference could change whether a grandfather lived long enough for his daughter to make it to the hospital. I won first place. The blue ribbon had 2 tails that scratched against my wrist when I touched it. My science teacher shook my hand twice. A neighbor from the foundation board stopped by and told Maureen she must be proud. Maureen tilted her head in the way she did when a compliment had arrived at the wrong person. She adjusted the ribbon with one finger and told the neighbor, "She's very determined for a scholarship child." Scholarship child. Not smart, not prepared, not persistent, determined. As if my effort was surprising because of where she had decided I belonged. I did not answer. Grandpa Ellis was already leaning over the poster board, tapping one of the hand-drawn maps with the end of his reading glasses. He did not ask whether I had won. He asked what I would change first. I told him I would put a satellite ambulance bay closer to the northern roads before December storms. He nodded like my answer deserved the same space as any adult's. The popcorn smell made my stomach turn because I had forgotten to eat dinner, but I remember standing taller, not because of the ribbon, but because Grandpa Ellis had treated the data like it mattered. Maureen treated competence as a debt I owed to charity. Grandpa Ellis treated it as evidence. At 23, the night I told Maureen and Roland I had been accepted into physician assistant school, the pot roast was oversalted, the gravy had gone cold, and the dining room clock clicked 11 times before anyone said congratulations. I had been accepted from 1,184 applicants. I had printed the email and folded it in my bag because I wanted to show Grandpa Ellis after dinner. Maureen read the acceptance letter at the head of the table, set it beside the serving spoon, and asked how much of the tuition was covered. Roland looked at her first. Then he looked at me and said, "Assisting doctors is steady work." He had a soft voice that made people think he was harmless. The roast scratched my throat with salt. Maureen poured herself more water. Paige, 21 then, stared at her plate and chewed the inside of her cheek until the skin near her mouth went white. Grandpa Ellis's card was beside my fork. He had written my name in blue ink with a hand that had started to shake after his 80th birthday. "Congratulations, Willa May," it said. "Build something useful." I put that card in my coat pocket before dessert. By then, I knew Roland's silence was not empty. It had a job. It kept Maureen comfortable. 2 days later, Grandpa Ellis brought me to the tool room behind his small white house in Brewer. It was a narrow room with pegboards on 3 walls, jars of screws sorted by size, and old coffee cans full of pencils sharpened with a pocket knife. The place smelled of cedar shavings, machine oil, and black coffee. Sawdust dusted the stool near the workbench, and Grandpa Ellis wiped it with a folded rag before he let me sit. That was his kind of tenderness. Practical first. He made coffee in an old percolator that hissed for 6 minutes. I remember the sound because he did not fill silence just to make himself important. He let the coffee work. He let me sit in the different temperature of that room, warmer than Maureen's dining room, slower than the clock that had clicked 11 times before anyone found a kind word. He had a small notebook in his shirt pocket. He always did. The cover was black, bent at the corners, and held closed with a rubber band. He took it out, checked one page, then unlocked the metal cabinet under the workbench with a key from his watch chain. Inside the cabinet were envelopes, not piles, not clutter. Envelopes labeled by hand, stacked in a tin box with a tight lid and a packet of silica gel tucked into one corner. Records, kept dry. He lifted a cream envelope and placed it on the workbench between us. He rested his palm on top of it for 3 seconds before speaking. "Records matter when people start editing memory," he told me. I looked at the envelope, then at him. He did not look dramatic. He looked tired in the clear, way older men look when they have been carrying something for longer than anyone else knows. He said Maureen liked rooms where she could arrange the furniture. She liked minutes where people were embarrassed enough not to ask for proof. He said there were things she had been implying for years, and implications could grow teeth if nobody kept the papers. Then, he slid the envelope closer. Inside was a smaller protective sleeve, an original adoption decree, and a short note in his handwriting. At the center lay a newborn hospital bracelet from Bangor Mercy Hospital, small enough to fit across 3 of my adult fingers. The plastic had yellowed at the edges. The printed name was faint but readable, Willa Hart. A hospital number sat beneath it, still clean enough to match the preserved birth and adoption file. I did not pick it up at first. It looked too small to have survived what people had made it carry. Grandpa Ellis watched my face without crowding it. Then he said, "This is not proof that you belong, Willa. You already do. This is proof for people who forgot how to know it." Ow! That was the first time I understood that his record-keeping was not about suspicion. It was about shelter. He was not preparing me to fight every insult. He was preparing me for the one insult that would arrive carrying a letterhead. He had already placed a notarized copy with Margaret Caldwell at Caldwell and Voss. He said her name the way he said the names of reliable tools, not affectionate, certain. If anyone ever challenged my family status or my authority in the scholarship fund, Margaret would know what to do. I asked him why he had waited until then. He poured coffee into 2 mismatched mugs, pushed one toward me, and said I had just entered a profession where records kept people alive. He thought I would understand better now. He was right. In medicine, memory is not enough. A patient says they take a white pill. The chart says warfarin. A cousin says there are no allergies. The bracelet says penicillin. A room says hurry. The pulse says wait. The record does not replace the person. It protects the person from whatever the room wants to believe. That lesson became muscle long before the foundation luncheon. At 2:36 a.m., during a March storm blackout 6 years later, Bangor Mercy's emergency department lost partial power while ambulances started arriving from 2 rural crashes. The backup generator flickered hard enough to make the fluorescent lights hum. The air smelled like wet wool, antiseptic, and overheated wiring. Outside, freezing rain scratched the ambulance bay doors like fingernails. Dr. Nathan Bell was trapped in surgery. Marcus Reed was trying to keep 4 rooms moving with 2 nurses and a med tech who had been on shift for 10 hours. I was wearing navy scrubs and black trauma shears clipped to my badge reel. I remember the feel of the shears knocking against my chest every time I turned. We received 19 patients in 47 minutes. I assigned rooms by respiratory risk first, not by who was shouting. I sent a man with a bleeding scalp to wait 3 minutes because his oxygen was steady and his pupils matched. I moved an elderly woman with quiet blue lips ahead of a teenager screaming about his wrist because air matters before volume. I started 2 IV lines myself when the line backed up. I caught a medication allergy before a nurse pushed antibiotics because the patient's daughter said no allergies, but the chart said otherwise in a note from 4 years earlier. I sent Marcus to the pediatric wing for warm blankets because the main warmer had failed, and the smallest crash victim was shaking too hard to answer questions. By 4:10 a.m., every patient was accounted for. No one wrote a poem about it. No donor took a picture. The charts closed. The generator steadied. Someone found lukewarm coffee. Marcus leaned against the supply cabinet with sawdust on his cuff from a porch project he had been failing to finish for 3 months, and he said the night could have gone worse. That was praise from Marcus. 3 weeks later, at a donor brunch, I stood near a window with a paper cup of bitter coffee, while Maureen spoke to 3 trustees beneath a framed photo of the hospital's first surgical wing. She wore pearl studs and a cream blazer. She told them I assisted doctors at night. Very hardworking, very hardworking. like I stacked chairs after church. I looked down at the coffee. It tasted burned and thin. I did not correct her, not because she was right. Because the charts knew, the nurses knew, the patients knew, Dr. Bell knew, Marcus knew, I knew. Some families keep seats, some keep records. On Tuesday, October 8th, 3 days before the Friday vote, I was in the ER break room at 6:42 a.m. after a 1-2-hour overnight shift, wearing navy scrubs with iodine on one cuff. Rain tapped against the high window in a steady, needling rhythm. The vending machine beside me hummed like an old refrigerator, and the half of a toasted English muffin in my hand tasted like cardboard because I had forgotten to butter it before it cooled. Marcus Reed slid a printed foundation agenda across the table without sitting down. He had been charge nurse on my night shift for 5 years, and he knew how to bring bad news into a room. Not quickly, not softened. He placed the paper where I could read it and kept his hand there until I looked at him. Item 7 read, Review of Family Representative Eligibility Hart, Medical Scholarship Fund. There was a memo attached. 3 pages. Foundation. Letterhead. Maureen's name in the footer, Roland's forwarding note at the top, and a timestamp from 5:58 a.m. The memo questioned whether I had ever been legally adopted into the Hart family and whether I had standing to serve as family representative for Grandpa Ellis's medical scholarship fund. My hands went cold. I noticed that first. Not fear, temperature, the same way I would notice cool skin on a patient before checking capillary refill. I read the memo once. Then I read it again. The break room smelled like stale coffee and wet rubber from someone's boots. A paramedic laughed somewhere down the hall, then stopped when the ambulance bay doors opened. I turned the final page over and checked the footer. I looked at the email distribution line Marcus had printed. Board members, foundation staff, scholarship committee, hospital executive office. I asked him who else had seen it. Marcus pulled out the chair across from me and sat. He said, "Enough people." I set the English muffin down on its napkin. There was one bite missing from the edge. I remember that because my mind had gone very still, and still minds collect small things. "She filed this before breakfast," I said. Marcus nodded once. He did not tell me not to worry. He did not tell me Maureen would never get away with it. He had seen enough families in waiting rooms to know what people could do when they wanted paperwork to excuse cruelty. The first thing I noticed was the timing. Maureen had filed the memo at 5:58 a.m., before most trustees would be fully awake, early enough to look administrative rather than dramatic, late enough that the vote was only 3 days away. In an ER, timing tells you whether something is accidental or planned. A patient who stops answering questions after a head injury is different from one who refuses questions because he is angry. A memo distributed before breakfast, 72 hours before a vote, is not confusion. It is a weapon with a calendar. I counted the distribution names, 26. Then I looked at Marcus and asked for a clean copy. At 7:18 a.m., I called Margaret Caldwell from the stairwell between the ER and radiology. The stairwell smelled like damp concrete and disinfectant. My shoes squeaked on the landing because someone had mopped recently, and the sound rose up the empty stairwell in small, embarrassing chirps. I stood between the second and third floors with my phone pressed to my ear and one hand flat against the cool painted wall. Margaret answered on the third ring. Her voice was low, precise, and awake. She was 58, an estate and foundation attorney at Caldwell and Voss, and I had met her twice before Grandpa Ellis died. She wore reading glasses on a brass chain and had the rare ability to make a conference room quieter without asking for quiet. I told her Maureen had filed a memo challenging my family status. Margaret did not gasp. She did not ask whether I was all right. Paper moved on her end of the line. Then a drawer opened. She told me Grandpa Ellis had instructed her in 2019 to notify me if any person challenged my family status or committee authority. She had the original adoption decree. She had Ellis's notarized 2019 scholarship fund amendment naming me as family representative. She had the sealed envelope containing the newborn hospital bracelet. The stairwell light flickered once. Somewhere below me, a door opened and closed. I watched a bead of water slide down the wall from someone's wet umbrella brushing it earlier. Margaret said Maureen Hart had created a document problem, not a family problem. The sentence steadied the air. Then we answer it with documents. I said. She told me the foundation vote was scheduled for Friday at 10 a.m. in the board conference room, followed by the donor luncheon at 11 a.m. If Maureen succeeded, the scholarship committee could redirect awards before the rural clinic endowment distribution at 12:30 p.m. That gave us 74 hours and 42 minutes from the moment of the call. I counted. Of course I counted. Margaret said she would prepare certified copies, confirm the governing bylaws, and attend in person. She told me not to send emotional replies to the board. She said every written response should be accurate, narrow, and usable. She said Maureen had given us a record, and we would answer inside that record. I asked whether the bracelet mattered legally. She said not as much as the adoption decree, and that was exactly why it mattered humanly. It was not the basis of my family status. It was corroborating historical evidence. It showed that Grandpa Ellis had preserved the truth long before Maureen needed it to disappear. I rested my forehead against the painted wall for 2 seconds. The wall was cold. Then I stood straight, because someone was coming up the stairs, and I had patience waiting. Wednesday, at 5 p.m., Maureen hosted a pre-luncheon walkthrough in the hospital atrium for donors and board members. I watched from the second-floor corridor after finishing rounds. The atrium smelled like floor polish, raincoats, and coffee from the kiosk near the elevators. The donor wall rose behind Maureen in polished stone, names etched in brass plates that caught the recessed lights. She stood beneath the largest section of the wall, pearl studs bright, foundation scarf pinned over her heart. Dana Mercer from the Bangor Gazette stood beside her with red-framed glasses and a green pen moving in shorthand across a small notebook. Maureen told Dana that Friday's vote would clarify the Hart family's intended stewardship. Intended stewardship. Maureen loved phrases with polished shoes. Roland hovered near the place card table, wearing a navy jacket and the folded linen handkerchief he carried everywhere. He saw me on the balcony. His eyes moved away so quickly that it looked practiced. The place cards were already printed. I walked the balcony slowly, reading the room from above the way I read an emergency department before a busy shift. Committee table near the podium. Donor families near the front, scholarship finalists at the back, service doors to the left, press table near the side wall. My seat had been moved from the scholarship committee table to table 14 near the service doors. Lily Santos and her family were placed at the back. Owen Whitaker and Ruth were there too, behind a pillar that blocked part of the podium. Maureen's preferred donor families were near the front beside the foundation chairman. Seating again. The family photo had grown into a floor plan. Maureen stepped closer to Roland near the place cards. Her voice dropped, but the atrium carried sound the way hospitals do when people assume marble protects them. By Friday afternoon, this will finally be clean. Roland looked down at the cards. He folded and refolded his handkerchief into a square. The fabric made no sound, but I could see the pressure in his fingers. Clean meant me gone from the center. Clean meant Lily's folder moved to the back. Clean meant Owen's application delayed. Clean meant scholarship money returned to the hands Maureen found respectable. I stood on that balcony for 3 minutes. I counted the tables. 14. I counted the chairs at the committee table. 12. I counted the visible exits. 5. Then I went back downstairs and finished my shift notes because patients still needed discharge instructions printed correctly. Wednesday night and Thursday morning became a sequence of small, exact movements. I asked Marcus for a copy of the agenda distribution list and the time the memo reached staff inboxes. He sent both at 8:14 p.m., with no extra sentence. I asked Dr. Nathan Bell to document my current hospital role because Maureen's memo implied I was a sentimental family appointee who wandered near medicine with a badge. He replied at 8:39 p.m. that he would prepare a statement, and I could hear his anger in the absence of adjectives. I obtained the storm blackout intake report, showing my signature on emergency triage decisions. 19 patients. 47 minutes. No errors in review. I called Margaret Caldwell twice to confirm which documents could be entered into the foundation record without violating privacy rules. The first call lasted 2 minutes. The second lasted 7. Margaret never repeated herself. She answered as if each word might someday sit under a judge's lamp. I printed the scholarship finalist list and highlighted Lily Santos and Owen Whitaker in yellow. The money was not abstract. It had names. Lily was 19, a first-generation nursing student whose yellow raincoat was too large in the sleeves. Owen was 22, Ruth Whitaker's grandson, a rural clinic applicant who stuttered when nervous and worked weekend shifts at a bait shop. Maureen liked to speak of stewardship as if money were a silver bowl she polished for donors. Grandpa Ellis had built the fund like a bridge. At 1:12 a.m. Thursday, I sat at my kitchen table in a sweatshirt over scrub pants. The radiator knocked 8 times before settling. My coffee smelled burnt because I had forgotten it on the warmer. The sealed cream envelope lay beside my left hand, beneath the yellow kitchen light. I did not touch it right away. The last time I had seen it, Grandpa Ellis had been alive, standing in his tool room with cedar shavings on his sleeve. The envelope had been dry then, precise, sheltered. Now it looked smaller on my kitchen table, beside a mug with a hairline crack and a stack of printed bylaws clipped with a black binder clip. I opened it carefully. The bracelet lay inside its protective sleeve against cream paper. Small, yellowed at the edges. Faint black print, Willa Hart. The hospital number beneath it matched the file Margaret had emailed at 12:36 a.m. I laid the sleeve flat and read the number twice. Then I read my name, then the birth date. There was no music in the room, no grand feeling rising up to meet the moment, only the radiator settling, the bitter smell of coffee, the slight rasp of paper when I moved the adoption decree beside the copied file. I breathed once through my nose, the way I do before suturing a child's forehead, slow enough that my hand would not shake. After Grandpa Ellis's funeral in 2021, Maureen had stood in his kitchen wearing a black dress with sleeves tight at the wrists. Funeral lilies were wilting on the counter. Someone's casserole had burned at the edges in the oven because no one remembered to turn it off. I had mentioned the envelope because Margaret had referenced it quietly near the porch. Maureen's face had hardened. "You cannot build a life around sentimental trash." She said it while standing in the house of the man who had kept records, so she could not edit me out of them. I remembered the smell of lilies and burnt casserole. I remembered Roland washing one clean plate over and over at the sink. I remembered Paige turning away. I remembered the bracelet staying in its envelope. At 1:12 a.m. Thursday, I placed it back there the same way. If this story is hitting close to home, comment bracelet below. For everyone who has ever had to stay silent long enough to protect themselves, this next part matters. Now back to the story. At 6:30 a.m. Thursday, Marcus Reed arrived on my porch with a thermos of coffee, 2 blueberry muffins, and copies of the hospital staffing records in a brown folder. Rain had darkened the shoulders of his jacket. There was sawdust on his right cuff from fixing his porch rail before sunrise. He did not ask whether I was all right. He handed me the folder and said he had numbered the pages. That was exactly the kind of care I could receive without breaking. I brought him inside. The apartment smelled like burnt coffee and wet wool from my coat drying over a chair. Marcus set the thermos on the counter, then looked at the spread of papers on my table without touching any of them. He apologized for the smudge on page 6. I said page 6 was fine. He nodded. Then he stood there for 5 seconds, searching for something else useful to offer. Marcus was quiet, not because he lacked feeling, but because he respected the weight of rooms where language had already done damage. He said Maureen had underestimated how many people remembered things. I looked at him then. He told me Ruth Whitaker had heard about the eligibility memo from a former foundation assistant. Ruth was angry. Not loud angry, labor and delivery angry. He said Dana Mercer had asked 3 follow-up questions at the walkthrough after Maureen mentioned stewardship, and Maureen had answered all 3 badly. He said Dr. Bell had found the storm report faster than expected because he had kept a copy for the emergency preparedness review. The record was widening. By Thursday afternoon, the packet had 9 tabs. Adoption Decree, 2019, Amendment, Foundation, Bylaws, Memo Distribution, Hospital Roll Verification, Storm Blackout Intake Report, Scholarship Finalist List, Endowment Timing, Supporting Historical Material. Margaret reviewed the order and removed 2 pages I had included because they were true but unnecessary. That impressed me. People who want revenge include everything. People who want a durable record include only what holds. Thursday evening, I worked 7 hours of a shortened shift because staffing was tight and my patients had no obligation to know my aunt was trying to erase me by committee vote. A fisherman came in with 4 stitches needed across his palm. A teenager had an asthma flare after gym practice. An older woman told me her chest pressure was probably nothing, and her EKG told me otherwise. I sent her to cardiac observation and documented the time at 8:52 p.m. Records. At 10:11 p.m., I found Marcus restocking gloves outside room 6. He glanced at me and said Margaret had called the board chair to notify him she would attend Friday's meeting with records relevant to item 7. I asked whether Maureen knew. Marcus said, probably. I thought of Maureen's fingernail tapping glass. I thought of her rearranging 42 relatives around a camera. I thought of table 14 near the service doors. I thought of the bracelet, small enough to fit across 3 adult fingers, and of Grandpa Ellis saying it was proof for people who forgot how to know. At 11:44 p.m., I went home. The rain had stopped, leaving the pavement black and reflective under the streetlights. My apartment was cold because I had turned the heat down before shift. I put the kettle on, did not make tea, turned it off, and stood in the kitchen with both hands on the counter. At 8:41 a.m. Friday, I dressed in a dark green blouse, black slacks, and the same badge reel I wore on shift. The blouse fabric felt too smooth after 3 nights in scrubs. My black trauma shears were still clipped to the reel. I left them there. Not as a symbol, as habit. My apartment smelled like rain-soaked wool because my coat was drying over a chair. Outside, tires hissed over wet pavement. A delivery truck backed up somewhere down the street, beeping 4 times, then stopping, then beeping twice more. At 9:06 a.m., I stood with one hand on the kitchen counter and thought of not going. Not because Maureen would be right, because there were 125 people on the guest list, and public rooms have a way of making old humiliations feel official. At 8, being moved to the edge of a photo had taught me that a room could participate by staying comfortable. At 16, Scholarship Child had floated above a science fair table while adults smiled and pretended not to hear. At 23, the dining room clock had clicked 11 times before congratulations arrived. I had learned rooms carefully. I knew what they could do. I counted 10 breaths. 1. The radiator ticked. 2. A car passed through a puddle. 3. My thumb pressed into the counter edge. 4. The badge reel pulled lightly against my blouse. 5. My mouth tasted like coffee and toothpaste. 6. Grandpa Ellis's envelope sat in my bag. 7. Margaret had the original. 8. Maureen had created the record. 9. Silence could be strategy. 10. I picked up my coat. At 9:14 a.m., Margaret called. I could hear paper sliding in the background. Her voice was calm. She told me the original decree was in her briefcase. The 2019 amendment was certified. The foundation bylaws were tabbed, and the hospital bracelet remained sealed until Chairman Bennett asked for supporting material. I asked one question. If she says I am not family, do I answer first? Margaret did not pause. No, she said. Let her finish creating the record. At 9:52 a.m., I entered Bangor Mercy through the east doors. The automatic doors opened with their usual tired sigh. The lobby smelled like coffee, raincoats, and the faint metallic chill of elevators opening and closing. Donor laughter floated from the conference wing before I reached it. I turned the corner and saw table 14 near the service doors. The hospital atrium had been polished for the luncheon until the floor reflected the winter-white tablecloths and the gold donor badges. Coffee steamed from silver urns near the back wall. Glass pitchers sweated onto coasters. Linen napkins scratched faintly beneath my fingers when I touched the edge of table 14, confirming what my eyes already knew. A string quartet from the local college played near the donor wall. The cello was slightly flat, not enough for most people to notice, but enough that the note leaned wrong every few measures. There were 125 people, 125 badges, 125 witnesses in a hospital where I had worked nights for 9 years. Maureen Hart stood near the podium in a navy suit, pearl studs, and a foundation scarf pinned exactly over her heart. She smiled at donors, with both hands wrapped around a white coffee cup she never drank from. Roland stood 3 feet behind her, clearing his throat whenever someone mentioned Ellis. I did not go to her. I checked exits. 5 visible from where I stood. I counted tables. 14. I located Marcus near the side wall, standing beside the coffee service with his hands loose in front of him. Dr. Nathan Bell sat at table 3, silver at both temples, rolling his wedding ring with his thumb. Ruth Whitaker sat near the scholarship families, silver hair pulled into a low knot, one hand in her cardigan pocket, where she always kept cough drops. Dana Mercer opened her green notebook at the press table. Lily Santos sat with a plastic folder in her lap, the sleeves of her yellow raincoat too long over her wrists. Owen Whitaker sat beside Ruth, looking at the program like it might ask him a question. Margaret Caldwell sat in the second row with a leather briefcase at her feet. Her gray suit had not wrinkled. Her reading glasses hung from a brass chain. She did not look at me for reassurance. That helped. The board's procedural vote began at 10 a.m. Chairman Harold Bennett, 66, retired bank president, tortoiseshell glasses, neat hands, called the meeting to order. Maureen sat near the front with a folder on her lap. Roland sat behind her, handkerchief folded into a rectangle, then a square, then a rectangle again. For 48 minutes, the room pretended to be ordinary. A treasurer's report, a capital campaign update, a donor recognition schedule. The cello leaned flat, coffee burned on the warmer near the back wall. Badges clicked against lanyard clips whenever someone shifted in a chair. At 10:48 a.m., Maureen asked to speak before the donor luncheon program. Chairman Bennett adjusted his glasses and allowed it. Maureen rose with the clean confidence of a woman who believed she had already arranged the room. She took the microphone from the stand. Her fingernail tapped once against the metal. The sound was small and sharp. She began with Grandpa Ellis. That was predictable. People like Maureen borrow the dead before they harm the living. She spoke of his devotion to rural medicine, his belief in hard work, his wish that the Hart Medical Scholarship Fund remain guided by family stewardship. Her voice was polished enough to make insult sound like governance. Then she said a recent document review had raised uncomfortable but necessary questions about whether I had ever legally been a Hart. The room changed temperature. Not literally. I know that. But 125 people can draw in a breath so carefully that the air seems to thin. Maureen turned slightly, not fully toward me. She did not give me the dignity of being addressed. She gave the room the performance of regrettable duty. We have all been kind to Willa, but charity should not be mistaken for lineage. Dr. Nathan Bell stopped rolling his wedding ring. Ruth Whitaker pressed one hand to her mouth. Marcus Reed set down a coffee urn so carefully it made no sound. Dana Mercer's green pen stopped halfway across the page. Lily Santos looked down at her yellow folder and gripped it with both hands. The room waited for me to stand, cry, argue, or leave. I did none of those things. I sat still at table 14 for 11 seconds. I counted. 1. The cello stopped. 2. The coffee warmer hissed. 3. Roland cleared his throat, then swallowed whatever he had planned to contribute. 4. A donor badge clicked once against a metal clip. 5. Lily's plastic folder creased under her fingers. 6. Maureen's pearl bracelet slid down her wrist. 7. Chairman Bennett removed his glasses. 8. Ruth's chair scraped a fraction against the floor. 9. Marcus looked at me and did not move. 10. Margaret's hand rested on the clasp of her briefcase. 11. Nobody coughed. In an ER, 11 seconds can be a seizure, a pulse check, a decision. In that room, 11 seconds was enough for Maureen's sentence to belong to Maureen forever. Pause here. What do you think happens next? Drop your guess in the comments. A. Maureen wins the vote. B. Willa walks out. Or C. The document Maureen feared is already in the room. And subscribe if you haven't, because the next 10 minutes are the reason this story exists. I stood, not quickly. The chair did not scrape, because I lifted it slightly as I rose. My fingers smoothed the agenda. Once. The paper edge that had been catching beneath my thumb lay flat. I placed both hands at my sides and looked at Chairman Bennett. I did not look at Maureen. Chairman Bennett, before the vote continues, I ask that Miss Caldwell enter Grandpa Ellis Hart's preserved records into the Foundation minutes. My voice did not carry anger. It carried procedure. That mattered. Maureen had tried to make the room choose between blood and pity. I gave the room a process it already claimed to respect. Margaret Caldwell rose from the second row. The brass chain of her glasses caught the overhead light. She lifted the leather briefcase, stepped into the aisle, and waited for Chairman Bennett to acknowledge her. He did. His voice had lost its luncheon warmth. Margaret stated that she represented the estate records of Willa Hart and had certified documents relevant to the Foundation's eligibility question. She used my full legal name, Willa May Hart. She stated that I had been legally adopted into the Hart family in 1991, that the adoption decree had never been rescinded, and that Willa Hart had amended the scholarship fund governance in 2019 to name me as family representative. The words did not sparkle. They did not need to. Adopted, never rescinded, amended, representative, signed words, filed words, words with dates and seals. Maureen's expression held for 2 seconds too long. Then, her jaw worked once. Margaret opened a folder and placed the certified adoption decree before Chairman Bennett. She placed the 2019 amendment beside it. She placed the tabbed Foundation bylaws beneath them. Each document made a soft sound against the table, paper meeting wood, the sound of a lie losing oxygen. Then Margaret addressed the sealed envelope. She said that in addition to the decree, Mr. Hart had preserved contemporaneous hospital identification from the date of birth and placement. She clarified that it was not the basis of legal adoption. It was corroborating historical evidence. Chairman Bennett asked to view it. Margaret opened the protective sleeve. The bracelet lay against cream paper, small and yellowed, with faded black print. I had seen it in Grandpa Ellis's tool room. I had seen it under my kitchen light at 112A. Now it rested beneath foundation lights in the room Maureen had chosen. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Ruth Whitaker stood. She was 70 years old, retired from labor and delivery, with silver hair pinned in a low knot and a cough drop wrapper crinkling in her cardigan pocket. She did not rush. She stepped forward 4 careful steps and looked at the bracelet without touching it. Her voice was soft but steady. She said, "That is ours." The room turned toward her. Ruth explained that she had worked labor and delivery at Bangor Mercy for 41 years. The format was consistent with the nursery bracelets from that period. The font, the number placement, the closure style. She did not overclaim. She did not decorate the truth. She simply confirmed what she knew. Maureen's left hand trembled against the side of the podium. Her pearl bracelet slid down her wrist with a small click. The color drained from the skin above her collar, leaving a pale patch where foundation lights struck her throat. Dr. Nathan Bell removed his gland and set them on the table, the way physicians do when a conversation has stopped being social. Marcus Reed folded his hands in front of him and looked at me, not Maureen. Dana Mercer wrote again, faster now, green pen moving in sharp lines. Lily Santos lifted her eyes from the yellow folder and looked directly at me. Air returned to the room in pieces. Maureen found her voice by forcing it through Dignity's costume. "That is impossible. Ellis was sentimental near the end. He kept things. That does not mean this committee should be governed by emotion. There it was again. Sentimental trash, dressed for public use." Margaret opened the Foundation bylaws to the tabbed page. She did not raise her voice. She read the eligibility clause, then explained that the committee question was not emotional, private, or discretionary. The adoption decree established family status. The 2019 amendment established representative authority. The endowment documents established that any attempted redirection of scholarship funds without my approval would be procedurally defective. Roland stood halfway, handkerchief in one hand. "Surely there are privacy concerns." Margaret looked at him with the calm attention of a person identifying a weak argument before removing it. She said the records had been introduced by the affected representative in response to a challenge distributed by Foundation officers and committee members. The privacy concern had been created by the challenge, not by the answer. Roland sat. Maureen gripped the podium. "The larger issue is whether Willa's role here has been overstated for sentimental reasons." Dr. Nathan Bell stood before Margaret needed to answer. He was 47, ER medical director, silver at both temples, still holding his glasses in one hand. He confirmed my title, my 9 years of service, and my storm blackout leadership. He kept it short. He said I made 19 intake decisions in 47 minutes under emergency conditions, and that everyone was reviewed afterward. No errors, no flourish, no rescue. Just the chart. Dana Mercer underlined something twice. Maureen shifted. I saw the exact moment she recognized that the first lie had failed and the second had not landed. Her mouth tightened at the corners. Her eyes moved across the room, searching for the old arrangement. Roland to soften, donors to smile, relatives to look away, me to occupy the edge. But rooms can change when records enter them. She tried again. This foundation has always relied on family judgment. Margaret replied that the governing documents relied on defined authority. Maureen said Ellis had been vulnerable in 2019. Margaret replied that the amendment had been notarized, witnessed, and executed after an independent capacity review. Maureen said the scholarship committee should not be disrupted by one person's personal grievance. Margaret replied that the disruption was the unauthorized eligibility challenge placed on the agenda. 3 attempts, 3 sentences, clean removals. Roland looked smaller with each one. Paige was not at the board table, but she stood near the back wall, expensive wool coat folded over her arm, chewing the inside of her cheek. I had not seen her when I entered. She watched her mother with the expression of someone hearing a family language translated in public for the first time. Chairman Bennett asked Margaret whether the attempted redirection of funds could proceed if the challenge failed. Margaret said it could not proceed under the current record. The current record. I almost smiled at that. Not because I was happy, because Grandpa Ellis would have appreciated the phrase. He had kept the bracelet in a sealed envelope for 23 years before handing it to me, and then it had waited longer still. Not loud, not dramatic. Present. Maureen looked at me then. Fully, for the first time that morning, I met her eyes. I had imagined that moment more than once in the 72 hours since Marcus slid the agenda across the break room table. I had imagined anger. I had imagined satisfaction. I had imagined the childish old wish that she might suddenly understand the 8-year-old at the edge of the family photo, the 1-6-year-old beside the science fair board, the 2-3-year-old holding an acceptance letter over cold gravy. None of that arrived. What arrived was fatigue, a clean, heavy tiredness. I could feel it behind my ribs and in my hands, the same way I felt after a shift, when every room had needed something at once. Chairman Bennett asked whether there was additional evidence. Margaret's hand moved toward one more tabbed document in her folder. I knew what it was. A broader review of Maureen's scholarship decisions over the previous 4 years. Preferred donor families. Scoring irregularities. Delayed applications from rural students. Enough to open a full membership review. Enough to move the day from correction to demolition. Maureen did not see the tab. I did. I turned to Chairman Bennett and said, "There is enough in the packet to ask for a full membership review. I am not asking for that today." Maureen stiffened at the first sentence. She did not understand the second. Not yet. She was still measuring only public loss. Roland understood sooner. His eyes dropped to the closed tab in Margaret's folder, then to the donor tables, then to me. For once, he did not clear his throat. Chairman Bennett folded his hands on the table. The tortoiseshell glasses lay beside the adoption decree. The bracelet remained on cream paper, small and factual beneath the lights. He asked what remedy I was requesting. Truth does not shout. It arrives signed. I stood beside Margaret Caldwell, not behind her. The room had shifted from spectacle to procedure, but the air still carried the sour trace of Maureen's sentence. Charity should not be mistaken for lineage. It hung there above the coffee urns and linen napkins, no longer powerful, but still ugly. Some sentences do not disappear when disproved. They become evidence of the person who chose them. Chairman Bennett waited. I looked at Maureen. Then I looked at the scholarship families at the back. Lily's yellow folder. Owen's hands folded tight in his lap. Ruth standing with her shoulders square. Marcus near the wall. Doctor. Bell at table 3. Dana Mercer writing. I named what I was not going to do. I could ask this board to review Maureen Hart's membership in every hospital foundation committee today. I could ask that her name be removed from donor materials pending investigation. I am not doing that. Maureen blinked as if I had insulted her again. I continued. Remove her hand from the scholarship money. Leave her a chair in the room if the board believes she can learn how to sit in one. The line landed more quietly than Maureen's insult had. That made it heavier. I was not offering forgiveness. I was not protecting her from consequence. I was choosing the remedy that protected the students first. Remove her from scholarship selection. Bar her from any future role in awarding that money. Allow her to remain a general foundation member without governance authority if the board wanted to carry that risk in public. It was mercy with edges. Maureen's mouth opened, closed, then opened again with no prepared sentence. For the first time in my life, I saw her look at me without arranging her face first. Confusion came before anger. Confusion came before shame. She could not understand being spared by someone she had trained herself to underestimate. Roland looked down at his folded handkerchief. He stopped folding it. That was the moment I knew he understood. Maureen's public standing was damaged, but not destroyed. That restraint did not come from weakness. It came from me. From the person he had watched be moved to the edge of photos, softened in conversation, minimized at dinner, and insulted at a microphone. He had spent 31 years letting Maureen decide the temperature of every room. For once, he stood in one he did not control. Chairman Bennett called for a motion. The board accepted my requested remedy with 11 votes in favor, 1 abstention, and Maureen not permitted to vote. The scholarship process remained intact. Lily Santos and Owen Whitaker stayed under consideration. The rural clinic endowment distribution was delayed by 18 minutes, not dismantled. Margaret returned the bracelet to its protective sleeve. Ruth watched until the envelope closed. Maureen stepped away from the podium as if the floor had become uneven. No one blocked her. No one touched her arm. The donor circle opened and did not close around her again. At 12:30 p.m., the luncheon resumed in a thinner form. People still ate because institutions often process shame beside plated chicken. Forks touched china. Coffee was replaced. The string quartet began again, and the cello was still slightly flat. I did not sit at table 14. Chairman Bennett moved me to the scholarship committee table without ceremony. That mattered less than he thought it did, and more than I wanted it to. Lily Santos walked past me once, on her way to the restroom. She stopped for half a second, as if trying to decide whether speaking would make both of us cry. Then she held up her yellow folder slightly, a small salute made of plastic and paper. I nodded. Owen Whitaker looked at me from beside Ruth and mouthed something I could not catch. Ruth patted his hand twice. Marcus brought me coffee at 12:52 p.m. It was fresh. I knew because it did not smell burned. He set it beside my untouched water glass and said the pages had held. That was all. The pages had held. 4 days later, a cream envelope arrived at my apartment. It was not from Maureen. It was from Roland. The paper was heavy. His handwriting was careful in the way of a man trying to make neatness stand in for courage. The note was 2 paragraphs long. He wrote that he regretted the public nature of the disagreement. He wrote that family matters had become complicated. He wrote that Maureen had been under strain. I read those lines without moving. Then I reached the one line that mattered. I knew enough to ask, and I chose not to. The radiator knocked 6 times. My coffee was hot this time, dark and strong enough to taste like something. Rain moved down the kitchen window in narrow lines. I read the note once. I did not forgive him on the page. I did not throw the letter away. I placed it in a drawer with other records and sent a short reply. I received your note. That was accurate. Accuracy was all I had available for him. 3 weeks later, Paige Hart Lowell asked to meet me at a small coffee shop near the river. She arrived 9 minutes early in an expensive wool coat and sat with both hands wrapped around a paper cup she did not drink from. The espresso machine hissed behind her. Wet wool clung to the chairs. And someone had spilled cinnamon near the pickup counter, and the whole place smelled faintly sweet under the coffee. Paige was 33, 2 years younger than me, old enough to have asked questions long before a boardroom forced them into the open. She told me Maureen had always said my adoption was informal. That was the word, informal. She said the cousins repeated it because repeating Maureen was easier than checking. She said she remembered the reunion photo but had told herself she was too young to understand it. She remembered the science fair, too. She remembered Grandpa Ellis standing with me more than he stood with everyone else. She did not ask me to comfort her. That was wise. I listened. My cup warmed my hands. A bus sighed at the curb outside, brakes releasing in a wet exhale. When she finished, I said, "You are old enough now to check." Then I left enough silence for her to understand that a relationship is not restored by one confession. She nodded. She cried quietly, without using it as a request. I respected that more than I expected to. 6 months later, Willa Hart remained a General Foundation member, but she no longer chaired anything tied to scholarships, rural clinics, student awards, or family funds. Her donor circle narrowed. People still greeted her, but not with the same open faces. After 2 board members asked whether she understood why falsified records could not be explained as family disagreement, she began private counseling. By the spring gala, she and Roland arrived separately, 14 minutes apart. Roland Hart resigned from the Foundation Finance Subcommittee after an internal review found he had forwarded Maureen's eligibility memo without verifying the documents. He sent me 2 more notes. I answered one. Not warmly, not cruelly, just accurately. There are men who think regret becomes repair. If written on heavy paper, it does not. But sometimes it becomes a record that the truth reached them. Lily Santos received the Hart Medical Scholarship and started nursing school with a focus on rural emergency care. She sent me a photo of her first anatomy textbook on a dorm desk beside the same yellow folder, now cracked along one edge. Owen Whitaker received a smaller rural clinic stipend and wrote me an email at 11:08 p.m., saying he had never seen someone correct a room without humiliating every person in it. I saved that email in a folder called Students. Paige did not become my sister in 3 weeks. Life is not that clean. But she checked documents. She corrected one cousin at Thanksgiving when someone repeated the word informal. She sent me a screenshot afterward, not asking for praise, just showing me the sentence where she had written that my adoption had been legal, complete, and never in question. I did not answer for 2 days. Then I wrote back, good. I stayed at Bangor Mercy through the winter, then expanded my role through the $8. 4M Rural Clinic Endowment Grandpa Ellis had placed under my authority. We funded 3 clinic placements, 2 travel stipends for students from small towns, and 1 emergency equipment grant for a coastal clinic that had been using a cardiac monitor older than Lily Santos. The first time I saw the replacement monitor installed, its screen glowed blue in a room that smelled like new plastic and ocean damp. I thought of Grandpa Ellis's tool room. Build something useful. Marcus Reed stayed my quiet witness. He finished his porch rail after 7 months and sent me a picture with no caption. Doctor. Nathan Bell recommended me for a regional emergency care board and wrote 4 sentences about the blackout night that were somehow more embarrassing than praise at a podium. Ruth Whitaker brought me a cardboard box of old Bangor Mercy nursery forms so the bracelet could be displayed with historical context, not spectacle. The box smelled like paper dust and cough drops. 9 months after the board meeting, I stood in the rural clinic scholarship office before the first student reception. The office had narrow windows, 2 metal filing cabinets, and a coffee pot that had been cleaned recently enough to smell like coffee instead of old heat. Fresh paint sharpened the air. Printer toner sat underneath it. Rain ticked softly against the window. The framed bracelet hung on a narrow wall beside Lily Santos's first award letter and Grandpa Ellis's old black-and-white hospital photo, not above my desk, not where it could become mine alone. It rested where future students could see it when they walked in carrying applications, transcripts, and the private fear that one missing paper could decide who they were allowed to become. The bracelet was still small, yellowed at the edges, faint black print, Willa Hart, a hospital number that had outlasted Maureen's memo, her microphone, her seating chart, and her polished word for cruelty. I touched the frame once with 2 fingers, the way I check a pulse. The bracelet was not there to prove I belonged anymore. It was there to remind every student who walked past it that a small true thing can survive a large false one. Blood isn't paperwork, and neither is family. If this story stayed with you, like the video, subscribe to By Then I Knew, and comment records if you have ever watched the truth survive someone's attempt to rewrite it. Share only what you are comfortable sharing. I read more of your stories than you know.